Great. So yeah, so now we have a third session of the day on recognizing preprints. Of course, that a theme that has emerged through the discussions already, recognizing preprints with peer reviews, but we have a set of speakers, I think, bringing us different perspective from the morning, and we're starting with Laurie Goodman from GigaScience, a kind of fairly long-term player in this open science world that moves, given the pace at which everything moves. So, Laurie.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. I usually would send Scott Edmonds because he's like embedded in this area, but he's just done an around the world trip, so he's very tired. So what I'm talking about is something that I think we all agree on here. So to a certain extent, I'm preaching to the choir, but I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why doing reviews on preprints is really important. And it's not just because there's a trust reason, which is a lot of what people are talking about. One of the biggest things really in doing this is overcoming delay. And so they've done studies on the time it takes for a manuscript to go from submission to being accepted. They don't really talk about rejected, how long that takes. So, it does vary from field to field. The first section, the immediate rejection, is actually quite scary about how much time on average that takes in these fields, which is 2 to 3 weeks. And that is dead time, where nothing is happening to that manuscript. So if this is up on a preprint server already, that information is already out there for the field to start assessing. So that, just putting it on a preprint server saves an enormous amount of time and makes that information available to the community. And speed, especially now, the speed of research is really important. The quicker people can see it, the quicker they can use it, the quicker they can reflect on it, et cetera. But then if you look at like first response time, it can be, it just is astronomically higher. And when they look at the time frame of how many weeks that is in the 11-week period, 90% of that return time is in the 11 week. So it's like 35% show up earlier, and then most journals are much longer. And then you're moving into, months. And none of this accounts for how many different journals they have to go through from review to review to review. And I've helped edit manuscripts that have been out for 3 years, going from journal to journal to journal. And I'm like, man, the prostate cancer people are bumming with how many people died while that data wasn't out there. So with putting the preprints in the reviewing path, I look at this from the standpoint of speeding up publishing. Now, publication, which Scott and I always want to just destroy publishing in general and make the, journals more of a place to get specific information for a field. But right now, that's not the status quo. So the question is, can reviewing preprints speed things up? And so that is basically in this second half of the queue. I don't know what the data is right now on how long it takes to do that. So I don't know how long it takes to get reviewers, so I don't really know how much this impacts it, but I do know that having the information out, and I also know that authors' abilities to, or journals' ability to look through and say, we want this, speeds up the final decision process. So that's why I think this is good. It gets it out there, and it makes decisions much faster. Now, there's been decades worth of time of work to try and reduce manuscript assessment and review time, which is what this really gets at. There's no need for a second round of reviews, reinventing the wheel. You don't have to re-upload with the cascades and all of this sort of things. However, the realities of this is that it doesn't really push peer review that much faster. First of all, the authors don't have a very wide range of choices within cascades and often don't take it up. The initial assessment you still send it to the new journal can still take weeks. And a lot of times, the fact that the editor knows or the review is non-agnostic puts in inherent bias. So they're like, well, somebody else rejected. I know they're not the same focus, but, And so, and then on top of that, they might still want additional reviews. And then it can, again, continue where the authors continue to submit. Also, the biggest thing that I want to highlight here in my next slide is that limited uptake of reviewing cascades and things like that, has actually been the thing that kills a lot of these speeding up, getting reviews out. And so I've already discussed this, but this is, I'm highlighting the fact that more journals are involved in this whole thing. I love that PCI has its own journal. It gives the authors so much choice. But again, you might still want additional reviews, and the limited uptake is what really worries me. So these are the kinds of things that I really think I'm really for reviewing preprints. But what I really think needs to be focused on is how we're going to move forward to make sure that this isn't underused, because it's really important. And one is to make the system easy for editors to take advantage of the system. When people first started using preprints, when we first launched, it was before bioRxives, we, as commissioning editors, trolled through arXiv and contacted authors. And then we have done that with bioRxiv. Society now has this tool that we're integrating into our commissioning thing. So if you can create tools for the editors to use, it will really speed that up. The other thing that might be useful, I think, is if you could do a pre-print, pre-review e-talk, where the less aggressive or proactive editors can just have things pushed to them. Hey, check this out. Are you interested? And then, again, I want to highlight, I've mentioned this before, there is a move to get more preprint servers engaged, but I think there really needs to be a focus on getting our Africa archive and these underserved preprint servers in sooner rather than later. And then the final thing, since it does take time for reviews, is to consider changing the review process, which is breaking it into sections. Currently, one of our journals, we do a questionnaire. We've looked through our papers and we say, these are the things we want to know. And we have yes, no, not qualified, and then we have a box for comments. From the beginning, we've done data curation, and so data auditing separate from the paper. And so that way, people don't get hung up on where's the data, what's this. We've actually carried out that process. My time is up, but these are the things that I think we need to really focus on driving this to success.
Thanks, Laurie. Next up, we have my neighbor and colleague at EMBO and Review Commons, Sara.
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm Sara Monaco, and I'm the managing editor of Review Commons. So as you all know by now, Review Commons is a platform that offers peer review of preprints. So we launched the Review Commons 3 years ago, EMBO and ESA Bio together, to accelerate access to peer-reviewed research in terms of reviewed preprints, but also in terms of published papers. So we really value reviewed preprint as a research output in itself, but with Review Commons, we also wanted to address one of the major problems of the current publishing system, which is redundant peer review. So we wanted to eliminate the need of multiple cycles of peer review of the same manuscript at different journals. And we did that by adopting journal-agnostic peer review. So in Review Commons, the peer review is done, is articulated to be journal-agnostic, so meaning that it is focused on the science regardless from a possible journal fit. So we partnered with bioRxiv and medRxiv to post our reviewed preprints, and with a consortium of 17 journals belonging to different publishing groups that all agreed to use our journal-agnostic peer reviews without starting the process from scratch. So our process is intrinsically journal-agnostic, but it remains journal compatible. So the preprints that we receive are subjected to an initial editorial decision, and then they are assigned to reviewers who comment on them in a journal agnostic way. And it's important to say that these are in-depth peer reviews done by experts in the field. So when we receive these reviews, we send them back to the authors without making any decision. And the authors can post their reviews together with their responses to the reviews on bioRxiv and medRxiv along their preprint to create their reviewed preprint. So this is the first outcome of Review Commons, and the authors can also stop here if they want. But they also have the possibility to transfer the same reviewed preprint to one of our journals. And the key feature of Review Commons is that if the first journal rejects the manuscript, it can be sent it again to a second journal with the same set of reviews. And this is possible up to 4 times within our system. So hopefully, after revision, a manuscript can also get published in one of our partner journals. So the journal-agnostic peer review is something that we like a lot and that we are successfully doing since 3 years. But at the beginning, this was challenging. So we were not really sure whether it will work and how it will be perceived by reviewers that, traditionally have this journal fit in mind. So earlier this year, we ran a survey across our authors and reviewers, asking them whether they agree that the peer review process should remain journal agnostic. And the response was strongly in favor of the journal agnostic peer review. And this support from the community was also confirmed by the fact that 97% of our papers were transferred to a journal. So that means that from the author's point of view, these reviews were constructive enough to be used to improve the manuscript and prepare a revision. And from the point of view of the journals, here you see the distribution of our published papers across our consortium. So you see that, all the journals accepted manuscript from Review Commons, meaning that even if the reviews were not tailored to satisfy any specific journal standard, they were informative enough from the journals to make a decision. And I have to say that the journals collaborated with us very well, because 95% of the manuscript really did not require any additional reviewer. So in conclusion, with Review Commons, we are trying to create synergies between the world of preprint and open science and the world of publishing by fast dissemination of scientific findings through reviewed preprints and collaborating to a more efficient publishing system. So with this, I conclude, and I pass the microphone to Marcel.
Perfect, under time, amazing, and a great transition to Marcel, who will talk about Review Commons from the partner perspective as part of the open science team at PLOS.
Thanks, Gautam. Thanks, Sara. My name is Marcel Laflamme. Thanks so much for having me here. So as Sara said, PLOS is one of the publishers that has partnered with Review Commons since the beginning. To date, just to give you a sense, we've had kind of over 400 submissions come to PLOS journals and over 150 published articles. So just to give a sense of the volume to date. So when I got to PLOS in the summer of 2021, the original kind of 18-month pilot of Review Commons was just wrapping up. And so one of the first assignments that I was given was to do an evaluation of PLOS's participation in the pilot. I didn't know much about Review Commons. To be honest, I didn't know much about preprint review. And so, in a way, I wasn't predisposed to say that Review Commons is great or Review Commons is terrible. The idea was really to just kind of look at the data that we had and to try to understand the work that it was doing for PLOS as an organization. So that included sort of internal publishing data, conversations with PLOS editors at the 5 affiliate journals, as well as reusing some of the survey data and other data that ASAP Bio and EMBO made available to us. So I'll go to the next slide. And what you see here are kind of talking points that really echo, I think, things that you've seen all day. But I guess I came to them in this sort of inductive way, kind of through sort of engaging with the data from PLOS's experience. And so, the evaluation that I produced, the results of that included a recommendation to kind of stay at the table, to sort of be an engaged experimenter with Review Commons as the initiative kind of continues to evolve. And these were really the reasons that I saw and that we see at PLOS in terms of why it's so consequential for us to be at the table. So the first two, working from the data were I guess the easy part. So what was clear to me was that that working with transferred reviews did increase efficiency, right? And so if we looked at time to publication for manuscripts that came with transferred reviews, it was just quicker for authors. I mean, it's just that disparity was really clear to see. And so just from an author service perspective, like that's a good thing. From a kind of reviewer burden perspective as well, so our numbers weren't quite as rosy as the ones that Sara presented, as far as 95%, so only 5% of manuscripts needing additional reviewers. So our numbers were a little bit higher than that. Although they did decrease over the course of the pilot, I think as editors became more familiar with working with the transferred reviews. But the number that was useful for me was 2/3. So was to say that 2/3 of the manuscripts that came to us didn't require additional reviews, whether that was by a new reviewer or by the original reviewer, right? So our editors were either able to make a decision, a reject decision, or in 15 or so % of the cases to accept an article solely on the basis of the transferred reviews, right, without needing any additional cycles of review. And so certainly from an efficiency perspective, from a kind of reducing burden on a kind of overstretched reviewer pool perspective, that's a really good thing. So the third point, I mean, talking about kind of decoupling evaluation from publication or beginning to sort of pull those things apart, I think we've talked today about how that's the hard part, right? That's really where we're talking about culture change. And I would say not just for funders or institutions, although we've been talking about that a lot today, but specifically for editors, right? And so that's sort of the part that I want to focus on in the time that I have remaining. As Sara mentioned earlier, so I mean, we have 5 PLOS journals that are affiliates of Review Commons, and the journals may be familiar to you, but they sort of fall into 3 categories, and I'm going to argue that matters, right? So PLOS Biology is a highly selective kind of flagship journal run by professional staff editors, supported by an editorial board, right? PLOS Computational Biology, Genetics, and Pathogens are what we call community journals, so they're focused on a particular subfield or method. And their editors-in-chief are active researchers in their fields, right? So that's a slightly different editorial model. PLOS One, of course, has staff editors performing quality checks and really setting strategy for the journal, but with researchers themselves serving as academic editors for individual manuscripts. And so if there's kind of a takeaway slide to my talk today, it's really this one, which is to say that editor concerns about using preprint reviews have to be understood and addressed in the context of their journal's editorial model and workflow, right? So saying what we need to do to get editors on board is X, I would argue is a meaningless statement, right? That it's really about the context in which the editor is operating, and we really need to dig deeper into that. So again, looking at this kind of data, both from surveys and from my conversations with PLOS editors, when we kind of try to group the challenges that editors report, I've kind of grouped them here in 3 categories. So fit, and again, what we mean by fit really sort of deserves kind of teasing apart. But editors did say that journal agnostic reviews can be hard for them, and that they can leave editors unsure about the audience to which a paper addresses itself or is appropriate for, as well as the advance, the sort of magnitude of advance that the paper makes. And certainly kind of prestige or impact or other things is probably sort of a silent third term in there. But even if we think about audience and advance, those are things that editors are trying to discern, and some editors talked about reading between the lines of journal agnostic reviews to try to get at those things. A second category of challenge was trust. And I think this was particularly the case for editors that are used to kind of relying on their own networks for review, right? And that really sort of take pride in being able to sort of to identify reviewers in that way. such that transferred reviews can pose a challenge for them, right? And the idea that they weren't involved in the screening or the selection can make them uneasy. The third challenge is maybe a more pragmatic one, but one that I think is worth thinking about, and it's really about visibility in the obvious sense of can you find the thing where you're looking for it, right? That publishers that are partnering with Review Commons are sort of working with our own kind of legacy systems and trying to make them interoperable with what Review Commons is doing. And we found that particularly occasional editors, right, editors who weren't handling a large volume of manuscripts can just get confused by what amounts to workflow exceptions, right, to kind of finding reviews in a format or in a place that they're not used to finding them. So my last slide here, what solutions have we found? And the we here is certainly both PLOS and Review Commons kind of working together as partners. Something that I heard was very positive on the Review Commons side, and Sara or Thomas can probably speak more about that, but sort of clarifying expectations about this significance statement that is part of the structured Review Commons reviews. So even those editors who were a little uneasy about journal agnostic found that a clear significance statement helped them sort of map the review onto the scope and the reach of their journal. I understand there's been some conversation about sort of inviting Review Commons authors to kind of identify communities, not journals, but communities to which they are addressing their work. So I think that's an interesting conversation to carry forward. Around trust, I mean, I think certainly Review Commons and EMBO have been really transparent about reviewer selection. So I think making that process visible to editors who might otherwise be leery has been valuable, as well as just sharing metrics on journal performance, right? So just being able to show journal editors how good Review Commons is when it comes to author service and when it comes to reducing reviewer burden, I think has changed the conversation a little bit away from just how do I know who these sort of reviewers are if I didn't sort of handpick them, onto kind of the broader value proposition that is there. On the visibility front, yeah, I mean, I just think there's some basic kind of tech and sort of UX work to be done on streamlining the presentation of reviews in submission systems within the constraints of what these legacy systems can do. Yeah, that's certainly something that we're talking about at PLOS. So I'll close and maybe just say that the challenges that I've talked about at PLOS, we don't see them as kind of problems with the Review Commons model or problems with the idea of preprint review, but I think they're features of this hard problem of starting to decouple evaluation and publication, right? And I guess what I would argue is that, I think there's value in really staying curious about the complexity and the situatedness of the work that editors do, rather than only characterizing it in terms of this kind of bad binary up and down distinction, even though that is one structural function of the way the journal editors' work can manifest itself. But I think really paying attention to the situatedness of editors' work can allow us to sort of enlist them and bring them on board, in the process of using the exciting innovations that we're talking about here today. So I guess I would close by saying, to the extent that preprint review will be articulated with the journal system, and I get that that's sort of an open question. That's sort of one of the things that we're here to talk about and think about. But to the extent that articulation is there, then I think we need to give editors the support they need to make use of those reviews, and to maximize the potential that they represent. Thanks so much. I think one of our online speakers is next, but I'll let Gautam do that.
Thanks. Okay, so of course, this next speaker needs no introduction to this audience whatsoever. So I'll let him start and tell us about, presumably, transformations at eLife. But Mike, it's all yours. Can you hear us? And
yep. Can you hear me?
yeah. So I'm also here to change your slides for you. So shout or give me a
Okay.
secret sign.
I don't have that many. I tried to keep it minimalistic because otherwise I'll just go over. So thanks for organizing this meeting to ASAP Bio and Hughes and others. I'm really sorry I had to change my plans at the last minute and not be there in person. Hopefully we can all catch up at some point. So I realized that in talking about all the, this idea of journal agnostic peer review, that kind of gave me a way of rethinking about what we're doing at eLife, which is I'm now going to start thinking of as journal atheistic peer review in the sense that we've been thinking about a world here, not where we try to integrate preprints and integrate public peer review into the journal ecosystem, but in a world that in which journals no longer really exist in any meaningful way. So give me the next slide, please. So at eLife, kind of somewhat quietly, I think, from the community's perspective, we've been doing preprint review for the last 2 years. So we started, almost exactly 2 years ago to adopt a new policy at eLife, in which we first of all decided to only review articles that were first published as preprints. So obviously people in the room here are doing the same thing. And as part of that, and really as part of thinking about a future where we put our emphasis on public peer review, we started asking our reviewers to produce public peer reviews for every paper that goes out to peer review at eLife. And they've done this for the last 2 years in parallel with making decisions about whether or not the paper would be published in eLife. But for the majority of the papers that we've reviewed, these reviews are now posted. And in that period of time, we posted reviews of north of 2,000 papers. Not all of the ones that we posted are from this last period. But so we've been really very active, involved in this process of creating public peer reviews. And because we were very happy with how this was going, the universe didn't collapse on us as soon as we started posting reviews publicly of all these papers. I think our editors, after a little bit of transition, handled the production of public reviews quite nicely, and thinking about kind of what does and doesn't belong in a public review, and what kinds of things have to be done differently when you're writing review for the public as opposed to writing review for editors and the authors. And that's gone quite swimmingly. And so we decided that that was not something that we wanted to do as a side business anymore, but really what we wanted to make the center of what we're doing. And so next slide. We decided and announced and are about to switch to a new model, which I think is pretty straightforward. Aaron talked about this PRC concept, and others have talked about it before, but I just want to highlight kind of how we're approaching it, and I think more importantly how we're thinking about this moving forward. So obviously everything starts with a preprint. Maria Lepton referred to this before. We don't review everything that's sent to us, partly because it's just impractical, and partly because it's harder to recruit people to participate in the process if they sort of feel like they're being forced to review papers. So we have switched the system we use for deciding what to review away from any measure of whether or not the paper is significant, but rather asking ourselves the question, is it useful for us to produce public reviews of this paper, and can we do a good job of doing it? Once that happens, we'll send the paper out for peer review. And once the paper goes out for peer review, we are going to publish the reviews of that paper. And that is our central business. We are now in the business not of deciding what papers we're going to publish, but of producing and publishing reviews of papers that the authors have already published as preprints. And I really want to emphasize that we no longer think that we are primarily in the publishing business. We are emphasizing the fact that we are in the peer review business, and publishing is something that authors do. It's at their discretion. They're choosing what to publish and when, and we are augmenting their published work. We are not publishers anymore. We post reviews of those papers. We send them to the authors. The authors, from this point forward, have complete control of what happens next. If they're comfortable with the way the paper stands, the preprint and our peer reviews of it will just, will be there in their form. They don't have to respond to the concerns or criticisms or suggestions made by the reviewers, but they're obviously free to. If they do, they can resubmit a new version and we'll re-review it and so forth. And then at any point, once the paper has been reviewed, they can sort of say, okay, we're done with this, and proceed to declaring the current version of the paper the sort of version of record. There's no fundamental difference between a preprint with reviews attached and a version of record, except for the fact that at this point, we'll submit it to databases and so forth. I expect this part of the process to disappear over time as the system, things like PubMed and Google Scholar and other things evolve to deal with reviewed preprints. But for now, this is kind of a necessary adaptation to the world. Okay, next slide. Just to highlight a few things here, you'll notice that I mentioned at no point are we making except reject decisions about papers during review. And this is when I say we're being atheistic about publishing. We are not a journal anymore. We are not deciding what gets published based on these reviews. We are publishing reviews and a synthesis of what the reviews contain, and that's it. We are publishing all the manuscripts with the reviews and an assessment, which I'll describe in a second. We're writing the reviews with a very conscious of the fact that they're going to a public audience and not the authors. And again, just to emphasize, this is authors have complete control of what happens here. Obviously, they choose whether or not they send the paper to us, then they choose if and when they're going to revise it. They don't have any mandate from us about how they're going to respond to the paper or anything. The only thing that that they can choose to do is to respond to our reviewers' comments and then potentially get a more favorable or a better review. Okay, next slide. We are, I think someone mentioned before the kind of difficulty of getting access to the reviews in bioRxiv at the moment. And I don't know exactly where this is going to evolve to, but we felt it was important to really highlight the peer reviews and our assessment of them in a way that integrated it better with the manuscript and gave the authors something that they could point to when they were sending the paper out for job applications or something, however they want to use it. And so we are now producing these reviewed preprints. Again, the reviewed preprint contains the author's work contained in the preprint and our reviews of it in a nice, I think a nice looking package. I think it's something people will be happy to share with the world. Its content is the same as what's on bioRxiv more or less, but it's there to it's there for kind of simplicity and aesthetics. We publish these reviewed preprints. If we, when it goes to a version of record, there's a few small differences, but more or less, this is the version of the paper that we are producing. So one of really the only main difference between what we've been doing up to this point and now is putting a little bit more emphasis on producing eLife assessments that are meant to stand on their own and independent of any kind of decision for the journal. So if you can go to the next slide. I'm not going to go into detail on exactly how we're doing this. It's all described on the eLife website and so forth. But the thing we realized was that there's value in being more consistent in the way that we have different editors and different reviewers summarize the outputs of their peer review process. And so we've created a kind of reference vocabulary that has a bunch of terms that we hope people will use to kind of capture different commonly made assessments of papers during the process. And those words will be highlighted in the assessments to try to convey to people the kind of things that they could use to compare across different reviews, across time and so forth. But we're trying to walk a kind of delicate line between providing consistent information and creating some kind of hierarchy that's just gonna be a Medusa for journal titles in the future. And so I think this is something we really need to think about more in the community as we start to produce more of these, is what is the best way to summarize reviews in a way that's useful, that is consistent and clear, but doesn't fall into the traps that we have for kind of the hard classification of journal titles. Next slide. I realized this was in a session about how to get adaptation and acceptance of this. And I just really, there's obviously a lot of issues that come up in thinking about reviewed preprints, but I want to highlight that really there's only one thing that matters here. And the only thing that matters is we have to get people to care about the contents of these reviews and assessments instead of the fact that they exist. So right now, people care about some label that's put on a paper, that it's in this journal or that journal. Once people start to stop caring about where something appears and who reviewed it and so forth, and start caring about the contents of the reviews, pretty much everything else we care about, getting authors to choose the system, having authors who are motivated to address critiques, inspiring reviewers and editors to participate, even the viability of this as a business model, all of that cascades from getting people who are reading papers, people who are looking for papers, authors, grant reviewers, people reviewing job applications. Once they start caring about what the reviews and assessments say, everything else we care about is going to follow. And so I really, for us, that's the main focus of our efforts to get this accepted in the world, is to really highlight the value, the clarity, the improvement you get in this kind of assessment over journals. And I think that once we as a community solve that problem and get people to care about this, everything else we care about will follow easily. And with that, I will stop, and probably for the first time in my life, I'm within my time limit.
Thanks very much, Mike. So the last talk, I believe Denis will be delivering it. So welcome.
Do you hear me?
Welcome back.
Excellent. Yeah, Thomas is still sick. I'm following on this. So PCI transfer model. Can you next slide? So just to remind you that PCI is now a PRC model and with editorial decision. So now we have 16 PCIs. You can have a look on all of them. Next slide. So I don't remind you of the process, but at the end of the process, there is a PCI recommended preprint. Next slide. And so people, as I said before, can choose to publish in peer community journal or to submit to PCI-friendly journals. And now we have over 100 PCI-friendly journals. Next. So just to tell you that we have a classification between 3 categories of PCI-friendly journals. The first one is the journals that accept, without further reviews, all PCI-recommended preprint. So of course, there is a peer community journal, there is PRG, so you can have a look on the different journals. And for a specific PCI, which is PCI-RR, PCI registered reports, with the help of Chris Chambers, who founded this PCI, there is now 29 actually journals that accept every stage 1 or stage 2 reports recommended by PCI registered reports. Next. The second category of PCI-friendly journals are journals that commit to give a fast response, usually in less than 5 days, to a pre-submission inquiry. Authors submit to them the PCI recommendation, the link to the PCI recommendation and evaluation. And those journals, you have the list here, give an answer. The first answer can be that they accept without further review the preprint recommended by PCI. The second answer can be that they will send it again for some peer reviews, or of course they can tell that they are not interested by the PCI recommended preprint. Next. And there is a third category of PCI-friendly journals with lower commitment, just saying that they may use the evaluation of PCI if adequate, and with no commitment on the delay for giving a response. Next. So we just put on our website for PCI-friendly journals informations for authors. So there is a table listing all the PCI-friendly journals. We put in this table if it is a scientific society or research organization journals, the publisher, if it is for-profit, not for-profit, the economic model, and of course the policy toward PCI recommended articles, first category, second category or third category. And we, of course, most important, we provide the instructions to PCI authors interested to submit. So in general, authors should alert the editors of their cover letter. They attach the PDF of the PCI evaluation process or give a link to the recommendation page. All PCI reviewers agree that PCI pass their name confidentially to journals. So if journals ask us the name of the reviewer, we can give to them. The evaluation process is CC BY, and journals can simply accept the article or reinvite the recommender and the reviewers if required. Next. So after acceptance by a journal, we put a link to journals on the PCI website. So we're now published in, like bioRxiv is doing with preprints. So, and we ask also journals to display a note, like you can see here, this article has been reviewed and or recommended by PCI Evolutionary Biology on their article webpage. Next. So for authors, this is quite convenient because, again, they can leave their preprint in the preprint server, PCI recommended preprint. They can publish it in peer community journals, so they can go to the PCI-friendly journal. And if they have a quick response, a negative response, if they are not satisfied, they can go back. They can submit it to another PCI-friendly journal, or at any time they can choose to publish it in peer community journal. Next. So just to let, general slide saying that for journals, if they are interested, just we give a survey so they can go to the link, and there is an application form link, and they can, of course, contact us. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Denis. Yeah, and thanks, round of applause to the speakers covering, I guess, a spectrum of journals losing their religion from agnostic to atheist. So we have 5 minutes for a bathroom break and then time to identify again your breakout group. So this will start at 5 local time, and same as last time, virtual and in person, and then a break at 6 p.m. and at 6:20 we reconvene for discussion. So thanks to all the speakers. And see you in a bit.